think what we need to be aware of the fact is IHL does not speak of counterterrorism as such. We have reference to terrorist attacks and the likes. What we tend to do with the International Committee of the Red Cross is to look at the factual situation, determine what is happening on the ground. Whether it's in Syria and airstrikes there by the Russians, coalition partners on either side, whether we're speaking about airstrikes and recent operations in Kunduz, civilians have been caught up in the midst of those airstrikes. Now, the interest from the ICRC is to ensure that those states involved in any form of airstrikes or any form of ground operations fully respect their international humanitarian law obligations. We would, for instance, reaffirm the need to respect such principles as distinction. Before launching any airstrike, ensure that you have identified who is on the ground. Be sure that you've identified the combatants and that they have been separated in terms of identification from civilians. The Geneva Conventions, they don't expect the impossible of those fighting. They don't expect the war to result in absolutely no civilian casualties. The Geneva Conventions are calling for restraint, are calling for precautions, are calling for the military to exercise all feasible precautions, to put in place the necessary limitations to ensure that humanitarian suffering is alleviated, whilst at the same time balancing the question of military necessity. It's an evaluation. From a practical perspective, they also need to be sure that before, for instance, one launches an airstrike, one is aware of where the target is, what is the nature of the target, what is surrounding the target, what kind of civilian population movement is there, to take into account the lay of the land, to take into account the population movement, to determine whether or not there's civilian infrastructures which are worthy of special protection, whether or not there are hospitals or schools or cultural property in the vicinity, and also to ideally, through the exercise of precaution, issue the necessary warnings beforehand to give the civilian population advance warning that there could be an airstrike or an attack, and to give them the opportunity to remove themselves. So we will speak and have a very strong, again, confidential bilateral dialogue with the command structures, because ultimately it is the commanders who will determine the nature of the operations. It is the commanders who will give the orders. It is the commanders who will show the necessary restraint to ensure that IHL is fully respected. But we also work with international organizations or organizations which bring together different armed forces from around the world. So we speak with CSTO, we speak with NATO, we speak with the African Union and their PSC setup. We speak with all those international military organizations which can have an influence, both operationally, but also through doctrine, on the operations of their member states.